After the Shadow War began, one fear rose above every other fear: the fear of a nuclear Iran. For Israeli families, Iran was no longer just a distant rival on a map. For Iranian families, the nuclear issue became tied to pride, pressure, sanctions, and survival.
For inspectors, it became a question of evidence, access, and trust.
For Israel, the question was sharper. What if a hostile power crossed the nuclear threshold? Iran insisted that its nuclear program was meant for peaceful energy and scientific progress. But outside Iran, many governments feared that peaceful technology could become military capability.
The same program looked different depending on where you stood.
Energy, security, suspicion. These three words would reshape the rivalry. This is the story of how nuclear fear changed Israel and Iran.
Iran's nuclear story did not begin as a secret crisis.
Like many countries, Iran first connected nuclear science to modernization and development. Under the Shah, nuclear energy was part of a larger dream of national progress. After the revolution, the old state collapsed, but not every old ambition disappeared. Then the Iran-Iraq War taught Iran a brutal lesson about vulnerability. Iran had been invaded, isolated, and forced to survive under extreme pressure. From that experience came a deep fear. Iran could not depend on anyone else for security. Israel watched Iran's search for strategic depth with growing alarm.
The nuclear issue cannot be separated from Iran's memory of war.
In Iran, nuclear science was often presented as a right of a sovereign nation.
In Israel, the same program appeared as a possible future danger. Between those two views stood diplomacy, suspicion, and inspection. In 2002, the issue became impossible to ignore.
The world learned of major Iranian nuclear facilities that had not been publicly known.
Inspectors wanted answers. Governments wanted certainty.
Iran argued that its nuclear program was legal, peaceful, and part of its national rights.
Israel feared that civilian technology could hide a military option. The crisis lived in the space between declared purpose and suspected capability. Inspections became the center of the struggle.
Israeli analysts saw timelines, stockpiles, enrichment, and worst-case scenarios.
Iranian scientists saw their work as research, energy, and national achievement. For ordinary Iranians, nuclear tension became connected to sanctions and daily life.
Diplomacy tried to turn fear into limits, inspections, and agreements.
In nuclear politics, time becomes a weapon.
But every negotiation carried the same question: could trust be built before time ran out? Israel feared that waiting too long could make action impossible.
The more each side feared the other, the harder compromise became.
Distrust became the fuel of the crisis.
Israeli analysts saw timelines, stockpiles, enrichment, and worst-case scenarios.
Machines could fail without a missile ever being fired.
The world saw headlines, but rarely the full story.
Scientists themselves became part of the atmosphere of fear.
Families far from the facilities still felt the pressure of the crisis. In Iran, sanctions and fear moved from diplomacy into markets and homes.
Still, diplomats kept searching for a deal. In 2015, the nuclear crisis reached a major diplomatic turning point.
The nuclear deal placed limits on Iran's program in exchange for sanctions relief.
For many Iranians, the deal offered the possibility of economic breathing room. For many Israelis, it did not remove the deeper fear.
Israeli analysts saw timelines, stockpiles, enrichment, and worst-case scenarios.
Verification became the heart of the deal.
Israel worried about what would happen after limits expired.
Around the world, the same deal produced relief, suspicion, and anger.
Then, in 2018, the agreement was shaken.
The United States withdrew from the nuclear deal.
In Iran, the return of pressure deepened anger and uncertainty.
In Israel, many believed pressure was necessary to stop a future threat.
Iran gradually reduced its compliance, arguing that the deal's benefits had disappeared.
Inspectors and governments watched the numbers with growing concern.
The phrase that haunted the crisis was breakout time.
But Israel planned for the most dangerous possibility, not the most reassuring explanation. Iran denied seeking nuclear weapons and insisted its program had peaceful goals. Diplomacy returned again and again, but trust was harder to restore.
Sanctions made the nuclear crisis part of ordinary economic pain. In Israel, the crisis became part of a generation's security anxiety.
Each move created a counter-move. The cycle became familiar. Pressure, response, warning, escalation. Iran's facilities became some of the most watched places on Earth. Israel studied them as if the future of the country depended on every detail. Inspectors documented what they could see and worried about what they could not.
For Iranian students, nuclear science could mean opportunity and national pride.
For Israelis, nuclear fear touched older memories of vulnerability and survival.
Pride on one side, fear on the other. This was the emotional engine of the crisis.
Negotiators tried to translate emotion into clauses, limits, and verification.
But headlines often moved faster than diplomacy. Israel debated where the red line should be.
Iran insisted it would not be bullied out of its rights. The nuclear issue was technical, but its fear was deeply human. Meanwhile, the shadow war continued beneath the surface. Sabotage, malfunction, and suspicion became difficult to separate. In a shadow war, silence can be as important as action. The people inside the crisis carried pressures that maps could not show.
Every failed negotiation made military options seem less unthinkable. Israel developed a doctrine of preventing hostile states from gaining nuclear weapons. Iran became part of a larger Israeli history of preemption and deterrence. For Iran, foreign threats reinforced the belief that strength was necessary. The crisis became a loop. Fear produced pressure, and pressure produced more fear.
Ordinary people prepared for possibilities they hoped would never happen. Ordinary Iranians paid the cost of isolation and economic pressure.
Every inspection was both technical and political.
Intelligence and inspections did not always create the same level of confidence.
Iran framed the issue as sovereignty, technology, and equal rights under international rules. 5. Israel framed the issue as survival in a hostile region.
The tragedy of the crisis was that both societies saw themselves as the vulnerable side.
When both sides feel threatened, compromise becomes politically dangerous. The nuclear issue became global because its consequences could not stay local. Oil markets, shipping routes, and regional alliances all felt the pressure. Israel did not see the nuclear program alone. It saw it alongside missiles and proxies. Iran did not see the nuclear issue alone. It saw encirclement, sanctions, and deterrence. By now, the rivalry had 3 pillars: nuclear fear, missile power, and proxy influence.
For Israel, these pillars combined into an existential question.
For Iran, these same pillars were framed as defense against pressure. Diplomacy survived, but barely. Over 2 decades, the crisis became part of the region's political weather. Behind the headlines were scientists, families, inspectors, and officials living under pressure. Behind every security calculation was the fear of what failure might mean. For Iranians, the crisis often felt like punishment for a decision they did not personally make. For Israelis, the crisis often felt like a danger they could not ignore.
This is why the nuclear story is not only about centrifuges and treaties.
It is about trust, fear, memory, and the limits of diplomacy.
When trust collapses, every facility becomes suspicious.
And every threat becomes proof that resistance is necessary.
Political scientists call this a security dilemma.
One side's defense looks like preparation for attack to the other. The result is a spiral that can pull in the whole region.
By the 2020s, the shadow war and nuclear fear were no longer separate stories.
For Israelis, the fear was that one mistake could be irreversible.
For Iranians, the fear was that pressure would never end.
For inspectors, the fear was that uncertainty would outpace verification.
And for history, the question became unavoidable.
How long can a shadow war remain in the shadows?
Each headline seemed to bring the region closer to open conflict. The next stage would not be only about uranium. It would be about missiles
allies, deterrence, and regional power.
Nuclear fear did not end the rivalry. It made every other part of it more dangerous.